The story of Eva Braun begins in Munich, a city that at the beginning of the 20th century was not only the cultural center of Bavaria, but also a political arena where a movement that would later change the world was gradually taking shape. Eva was born on February 6, 1912, to a teacher, Fritz Braun, and his wife, Franziska. Unlike her future environment, she came from a very ordinary, middle-class German family. Her childhood was nothing out of the ordinary. School years, sports, first hobbies in fashion and photography. The girl grew up in an atmosphere typical of many German families of that time, with respect for discipline and hard work, but without bright ambitions. Her parents hoped that she would become a teacher or a secretary, professions available to women of her circle. By the end of the 1920s, Germany had already experienced severe economic shocks, hyperinflation and political crises. Munich was becoming the center of National Socialist ideology. It was here that Eva, still a young girl, encountered people whose names the whole world would soon know. She attended a Catholic school, was an average student, and in her youth was more interested in theater, sports, and photography than in politics. Eva herself showed no interest in ideological movements. She was occupied with personal hobbies, friendship, and fashion. After school, Braun got a job in the photo studio of Heinrich Hoffmann, the official photographer of the NSDAP. This job became fateful. The atmosphere of the studio, where party officials, including Hitler himself, were constantly visiting, opened up a completely different world for her. Her first meeting took place in 1929, when she was only 17. For her, she was just one of the studio's clients, but Hitler noticed the young, attractive girl. She was not an actress, a socialite or a representative of the elite. On the contrary, it was Eva's simplicity and spontaneity that impressed him. Hitler, already a well-known politician at the time, but not yet the head of state, was under the close attention of society and consciously avoided public affairs. For him, Eva became an opportunity to keep his personal life in the shadows. Their relationship developed slowly, without open confessions and demonstrations. For Eva, it all began as a secret, which she carefully concealed even from her closest friends. However, the relationship was not cloudless. In her youth, Eva suffered from loneliness. Hitler often left her alone, devoting all his time to politics. Already in the early 1930s, she experienced a severe crisis. There is a known case when she tried to commit suicide due to a lack of attention from Hitler. This episode shows how dependent she was on his approval and closeness. Although their union still remained a secret, after Hitler came to power in 1933, Eva's position changed. Her place in the Führer's entourage became increasingly secure, although her name was not officially mentioned in the press. She lived in his residence on Obersalzberg, had access to closed circles, but remained in the shadows, did not participate in politics, and did not speak in public. In the eyes of the Third Reich's top leadership, Eva was the Führer's private affair. This position had a dual nature. On the one hand, it provided her with privileges and a special position. On the other, it deprived her of independence and forced her to exist in a secondary role. Life in Hitler's shadow gradually shaped Eva's character. She learned to adapt, to be invisible when necessary, and bright when it was necessary to amuse his inner circle. Photos and home movies that have survived to this day show her as a smiling, easygoing woman, passionate about sports and fashion. But behind this ease hid a tragic reality. Her life depended entirely on one person. By the end of the first half of the 1930s, Eva had finally become part of the Führer's inner circle. She settled in his residence, but their union was still carefully hidden from the general public. It was important for Hitler to maintain the image of the leader of the nation, completely devoted to the cause of Germany and not distracted by family matters. Therefore, Eva existed as if in a parallel reality, close to the center of world politics, but outside the official spotlight. This hidden life, filled with both privileges and internal contradictions, became the basis of her entire future destiny. Eva Braun, a girl from an ordinary Bavarian family, gradually transformed into a woman who was destined to share her last hours with the most famous dictator of the 20th century. Eva Braun's life in Hitler's entourage gradually turned into a closed world filled with contradictions. On the one hand, she had access to the very center of power in the Third Reich, but on the other, she remained in the shadows, an officially unrecognized figure. Even Hitler's close associates did not immediately learn of her existence, because the Führer carefully concealed his personal life, fearing that the image of the leader of the nation could suffer if his relationship with a woman became known. It was important for Hitler to appear exceptionally devoted to his cause and people, a person who had no room for romantic feelings. Eva led an outwardly calm and measured life, but in reality her situation was filled with anxiety and alienation. She had the best houses, resorts, luxurious clothes and jewelry at her disposal, but she had almost no freedom. She could not openly accompany Hitler to official events, and had no right to interfere in the affairs of the state. For many years, her existence was limited to the role of a companion, waiting for rare moments of attention from the busy dictator. However, Eva knew how to use her access to Hitler's daily life. She showed herself to be a keen observer, and even kept diaries where she described his habits, moods, outbursts of anger and moments of vulnerability. These notes later became a valuable source for historians, because through the prism of her personal notes, one can see Hitler not only as a cruel dictator, but also as a person with weaknesses, oddities and obsessive rituals. A special place in her life was occupied by the Berghof, Hitler's Alpine residence. It was there that Eva spent most of her time, enjoying the beauty of the mountains, making amateur films and photographing the Führer's inner circle. The camera became her instrument of self-expression. Eva Braun's photographs are a unique testimony to the private life of the Nazi elite, where, alongside carefree walks and prim poses, the atmosphere of the coming catastrophe can be seen. Despite the external idol, Eva lived in a state of constant internal tension. She understood that her role remained ephemeral, and that in the event of political collapse, she could simply be forgotten. It is no coincidence that her letters contain hints of loneliness and despair. Hitler made no promises to her, and never sought to make their union official. Even her friends called her the invisible bride, a woman who was there, but as if she were not there. Nevertheless, in this difficult position, she developed her own strategy for survival. Eva did not try to interfere in politics, but sought to maintain her place next to Hitler through personal loyalty and the ability to be invisible. She knew when it was better to remain silent, when to keep the conversation going with a light joke, and when to step aside. This was where her strength lay, the ability to adapt to circumstances that might have become unbearable for another woman. She was surrounded by Hitler's secretaries and the wives of high-ranking Nazis, and each of these women occupied her own niche, the Führer's world. But Eva stood out because she remained in his shadow longer than anyone else, going with him from his secret girlfriend to his last day in the bunker. And although her role seemed insignificant in the 1930s, she gradually turned into a figure whose presence became an integral part of the dictator's personal life. Eva Braun lived in a world where on the outside there was grandiose politics, wars and fateful decisions, and on the inside there was loneliness, waiting and a strange closeness to a man who, perhaps, never loved her the way she loved him. It is this paradox that makes her story tragically unique. By the beginning of World War II, Eva Braun's position had been completely strengthened. Although she still formally remained the invisible woman, Hitler never appeared with her in public as a partner, but her presence at the Berghof and other private residences was becoming commonplace. She was there when the Führer received the most influential guests of Europe, but she was always behind the scenes, away from politics and diplomacy. To those around her, It looked like a carefully constructed theatre, where Eva was assigned the role of an extra. But it was precisely due to this role that she became a witness to events that determined the fate of the world. The war brought Eva both new opportunities and new hardships. On the one hand, she had more freedom. She could manage her time, travel, organize photo shoots and film screenings in the Alpine residence. On the other hand, the war alienated Hitler further and further. His days were scheduled with meetings, negotiations, and endless military reports. For Eva, this meant hours of solitude that she filled with social entertainment, walks, reading fashion magazines, movies, and grooming. It was during the war that her passion for photography and cinema reached its peak. Eva created a kind of visual archive in which she saved dozens of hours of amateur photography and thousands of photographs. In these films, you can see Hitler not as a dictator, but as the owner of the house, surrounded by friends and dogs, laughing, joking, and behaving naturally. For historians, this contrast has become an invaluable source. Eva's photos allow us to look into that part of the life of the Nazi elite that official propaganda never showed. At the same time, Eva increasingly felt a gap between the world of war and her personal world. While Europe was burning, she was busy with outfits, new hairstyles, and choosing cosmetics. Many of her acquaintances considered her superficial, even frivolous. But this superficiality concealed a defense against the horror of reality. Eva consciously turned away from politics, preferring the world of fashion and cinema, where she felt alive. It was her escape, her way of preserving her own eye in the shadow of a man whose life was entirely consumed by war. The relationship with Hitler became increasingly contradictory. Sometimes he could show unexpected warmth. He gave her expensive jewelry, emphasized her special place in his circle. But at other times he completely ignored her, did not invite her to important events, and made her wait for weeks. For Eva, this was painful, because she strove for recognition, although she understood that her official existence was impossible. In the circle of people close to the Führer, Eva nevertheless began to gain a certain influence. She was friends with secretaries, could afford herself slight whims, and gradually her presence began to be perceived as a given. Many understood, Hitler may be a ruthless dictator for the whole world, but next to Eva he allowed himself to relax, and this made her indispensable. Nevertheless, her life was still filled with anxiety. She was well aware that her fate depended entirely on one person. Having neither political power nor her own social status, Eva lived in anticipation, when Hitler would pay attention to her, when he would call her again, when he would give her a feeling of closeness. And although her position seemed enviable, she was closer to the center of power than any other woman in Germany. In reality, it was an existence in a fragile cage, where love and despair were intertwined into one. Gradually, Eva learned to live in this paradox. She built her own little universe from dresses, films, and social games, while the world was collapsing under the blows of war. But it was precisely this duality, a life between luxury and fear, love and indifference, the illusion of happiness and the sense of doom, that made her fate one of the most controversial stories in Hitler's circle. By the middle of the war, Eva Braun's position had become almost inextricably linked with the image of family life in Hitler's residences. At the Berghof, on Obersalzberg, she played the role of hostess, although formally she had no official status. There was a special atmosphere here, intimate, far from the noisy halls of the Reich Chancellery. Eva organized movie nights where Hollywood comedies and romantic dramas were shown, invited guests to stroll in the garden or go skiing together. In these little things, she created the illusion of a normal life, which contrasted so much with the harsh reality of the frontline reports. Her world was filled with contrasts. On the one hand, she had access to luxury, expensive clothes from Paris, jewelry, endless photo albums, and color film recordings. On the other hand, she lived in anticipation of rare meetings with the man for whom she was giving up a full life. Hitler rarely showed up, but each visit was like a celebration. Eva caught every detail, a glance, a smile, a casual phrase, as if she were assembling an entire universe from these tiny moments. Psychologically, it was a difficult existence. She often felt forgotten and unnecessary, especially when the Führer did not come for weeks. Then she would become despondent, write to her friends about her melancholy and loneliness. But as soon as he showed up, her mood changed instantly. His presence was almost a drug for her. She felt alive, loved, important. This dependent position made her emotionally vulnerable, but at the same time explains why she could not break off this relationship, despite its pain. The Führer's inner circle had mixed feelings about Eva. For Bormann, she was an empty and useless figure, a distraction. Goering and Goebbels looked down on her, considering her a society girl of no importance. Only a few women from her circle, such as secretaries or wives of high-ranking officers, found a common language with her and supported her. Eva was well aware of her position, to be invisible. But it was precisely this invisibility that saved her. Unlike the men from her inner circle, she was not responsible for making decisions, which meant she could stay away from political intrigues. Her main hobby remained photography. She enthusiastically took pictures not only of landscapes and friends, but also of Hitler himself, in moments of rest, with dogs, at breakfast, on the terrace. These shots, taken with love and attention to detail, are of great value today, because they show the dictator not in the image of the leader of the nation, but as a person living behind closed doors. Eva felt like the keeper of this world and seemed to subconsciously create a chronicle of their hidden life. Nevertheless, her life was not cloudless. In moments of depression, Eva wrote in her diary that she sometimes thought about suicide. For her, this was not so much a real intention as a form of protest against the indifference of her beloved man. She tried to show that her pain was real, that she could not endlessly be content with the role of a shadow. But Hitler remained adamant. His coldness was explained not only by his preoccupation with the war, but also by his character traits. He did not know how to be close, did not know how to give himself completely. Over time, Eva found her own ways to cope with this. She surrounded herself with symbols of normal female life, new dresses, dogs, cosmetics, films. She turned the house in the Berghof into an island of comfort, where lightness and ease reigned. For those who got there, it seemed that the war remained somewhere very far away. But behind this illusion, another truth was hidden. Eva understood that her fate was forever linked to the man who was leading the world to catastrophe. This paradox is what makes her image so tragic. A woman who dreamed of love and family happiness found herself a hostage to the greatest drama of the 20th century, her life balancing between the comfort of a private world and the horror of a global war. By 1944, the illusion of comfort and normal life for Eva Braun began to crumble rapidly. The war was entering its decisive phase, and even at the Berghof, the approach of catastrophe was felt. More and more often, the evenings were accompanied by alarming radio reports about the bombing of German cities, the Allied offensive, and heavy losses on the Eastern Front, even where the atmosphere of a resort had previously reigned. A spirit of doom was now in the air. Eva tried to maintain her usual routine. She continued to organize film screenings, ski, walk her dogs, take photographs. But sadness increasingly appeared in her smile. She understood that their world was collapsing, although she preferred not to say it out loud. For her, the main thing was to be near Hitler, and when the Führer finally moved to the Berlin bunker, Eva followed him without hesitation, although she knew that she was going to meet her death. In the bunker under the Reich Chancellery, their life turned into a closed existence in a world of concrete, steel and dim light. In these cold corridors, Eva remained surprisingly calm. She encouraged those around her, joked, and looked after her appearance, as if trying to create the illusion of normality where there could be none. Witnesses noted that she was the most balanced of all, as if she had accepted her fate earlier than the others. The relationship with Hitler took on a special tone in these last weeks. The Führer, surrounded by betrayal, defeat and treachery, became closer to her for the first time than ever. Eva was not there for power, wealth or profit. She stayed until the end. This devotion touched even him, a man accustomed to loneliness and cold distance. It was during these days that he did what he had not dared to do for many years. He proposed marriage to her. On April 29, 1945, in the bunker, in the presence of several witnesses, their short wedding took place. For Eva, this moment was the realization of her long-held dream. She finally became the wife of the man she had loved all her life. Even though it happened underground, at the hour of death, it was there that her wish came true. She signed the documents as Eva Hitler and, according to eyewitnesses, was beaming with happiness. But there were only a few hours left, on the morning of April 30th, when it became clear that the Soviet army was ready to break through to the center of Berlin. Hitler and Eva decided to leave this life together. Eva insisted that she would not leave him under any circumstances. She refused offers to leave the city, rejected the opportunity to save herself. For her, life without him had no meaning. In their last minutes, they behaved calmly. Eva was wearing a dress, put on light makeup, as if she were preparing not for death, but for an evening with her beloved. While the empire was collapsing around her, she maintained an extraordinary gentleness and determination. Their departure was instantaneous. Hitler shot himself, Eva took cyanide. Thus ended the story of a woman who spent almost her entire life in the shadows, but remained by her side in the darkest moments. Her devotion and choice are still controversial for some. She is a symbol of blind love for others, an accomplice to a criminal regime. But one thing is clear: Eva Braun became part of the tragedy of the 20th century, in which personal happiness was inextricably linked with a global catastrophe.